Should we play contemporary music within the church? This is a pertinent question to me because I've been trying to convince my pastor that my super heavy metal emo band should be playing at the church to impress my many church crushes. Sadly, he believes that will raise the blood pressure too much of the congregation, which is largely over 70 years old, and may kill a few people. Now, I'm willing to commit murder to get to my crush and maybe go to hell in the process. But for the rest of the church, this question has been ravaging the pews as we discuss whether or not certain kinds of music is irreverent or not. And I have a lot of thoughts on this. The first thing I'd like to say is I don't really want to talk about aesthetics, because I think aesthetics have dominated Christian conversations in a way that's unhealthy. I don't think your rad trad, orthodox, stained glass windows, trad Lutheran, Presbyterian aesthetics are going to save you. I sometimes believe this personally, which is why I worship a stained glass window in my house, which is also an experiment I'm willing to go to hell for. But again, for the rest of the church, I think this is largely a bad idea. And I think we have to think about not the aesthetics of the music, but what they convey in a larger culture and what that means for whether or not we should accept certain types of music. Now, first let's talk about context, because I think this is one of the biggest things that gets misunderstood in these conversations. One of the many verses that gets brought up when talking about Christian music is David dancing in the street. I think that we have to think about that David was dancing in the street and not in the temple. And this is a really big way we should think about these things. I think if David had been dancing in the temple, it would have been irreverent. If you remember, a guy simply touching the Ark of the Covenant killed him. And so the fact that David might be dancing around the Ark of the Covenant seems a little strange to me. So I think when we're talking about outside of the church, I'm fine with any type of Christian music existing. In fact, I'm pretty quote-unquote theologically liberal when it comes to what kind of Christian art there can be. In general, I'm a theological conservative. However, when it comes to art, I think that art needs to be experimented with. It needs to wrestle with God. I think that the part of our church that does art is typically the Jacobs, the people who wrestle with God the strongest. And sometimes wrestling with God is ugly. It's beautiful and it should be captured, but it is ugly. And it's part of us that is relatable. And this is one of the reasons why I think that these types of arts should exist, why I think Christian rap should exist, why Christian heavy metal should exist. I think this changes, though, when David goes from dancing in the streets to dancing in the church. For example, if we had a Christmas service and I started having a somber mood, that is really strange. Christmas time is about Jesus' birth. To have a sad service kind of conveys that Jesus' birth is sad. And so in that sense, I think that would be theologically incorrect, although having somber services in general might be correct. For that reason, I think that outside of the church, inside of the church divide, and furthermore, outside of the service, inside of the service, is going to be the biggest dividing line between these things. In general, everything, or not everything, but most mediums, and all mediums, in my opinion, are fine outside of the church. But when we go inside of the church, when we're giving out Holy Communion, when we're actually talking about deep theological issues, it's good that we have a sense of reverence. And then the question is, what actually conveys reverence? And I think we should look at dress codes for a little bit, and especially how we see dress codes between gender. Now, I know this seems unrelated, but I promise you, there's something related between me not being able to wear a skirt and also whether or not music is reverent or irreverent. Now, what is that connection? Well, let's think about that skirt example, because in certain cultures, it might be appropriate for a man to wear a type of skirt. Maybe that is the masculine attire. And many people have pointed out that the masculine-feminine divide doesn't make any sense because given a different culture, the dress, the relative dress, what represents masculine or feminine, is relative. It changes. And I think what I would like to point out is absolutely these people are correct. What actually makes something male or female in dress attire is constantly changing. But the fact that there is a distinction is not relative. There has always been a distinction in basically every culture known to man between men and women's attire. So what the difference is matters less than that we have those differences and we notice them. And the same is true of reverent or irreverent music. What could be reverent or irreverent in a society may change, but the fact that those categories do exist and we can sort into those categories is not relative. It is something that has always existed. There's always been certain actions that are reverent or irreverent given a situation, and the fact that that changes doesn't diminish that. It just means that the relative distance between categories themselves change, but not the fact that those categories themselves exist. This gives me hope, because maybe interrupting that little kid's ballet with my emo rock band, maybe in the future will seem more reverent than it was last week when I was banned from all further family events. Now, let's talk about what is reverent or irreverent given our current culture. Now, I currently exist in America, so I'll be talking about America specifically, but I deeply encourage people from different cultures to do reverent things for their culture. I think that Christianity can survive in multiple different cultures and doesn't have to be dominated by the West, especially given that Christianity is more and more dominated by the global South, and I'm happy to, when going to a church in the global South, do what is reverent for their culture. Because the idea is to establish that this is a reverent place rather than to confine to a cultural standard. But given the West, I would say the reason I would not want my punk emo band in the church, and why I've been banned from my family's ballet recitals, is because that emo punk band is a sign of youth, it's a sign of energy, it's a sign of rebellion. It is rebelling against something. Well, I think when we think about something like classical music, that is seen as something maybe more old school, maybe a little more refined, maybe I could say, maybe uplifting, or music that is pointing towards God. And that might change in the future. Maybe in the future, classical music is seen as the new punk music, and we play punk music in church. Who knows? But as of now, when I think about the church music we have, it has very strong major chords that are uplifting, that show the strength of God, and that lyrics point to Him. And for this reason, I think that the type of music we should have is largely acoustic, largely something that involves the entire voice of the church, and something that is not related to other forms of rebellion. For example, punk music, for example, metal music, for example, these types of music. And I think it also should be disconnected from music that is seen in tune with a certain type of culture. For example, pop music, which can be in tune with things like over-sexualization or things of this sort. So for this reason, I think the classical music we have in church, or the typical church hymns, are seen as more reverent because in context, they seem to point towards conformity, not with a societal standard, but with God's will, which is something that we should always be pointing towards. So all in all, should I be executed for wanting to impress my church crushes with my emo metal music? Probably not, but I think when we think about these things, we should think not what makes me dance, what makes me groove, but what is reverent, what glorifies God, especially when in service. And when we leave those service halls, we should go out and make Christian punk music. And I think that we should dance in the streets. I think one of the biggest problems with this discussion in general is that worship has been confined to the halls and the walls of churches. And that is not something that has to be true. Instead, we could worship anywhere, and the fact that we're trying to squeeze more stuff into that hour is more indicative of the fact that we only do church and only do Christianity when we're at church. And instead, we should be doing church all the time, and that opens the door for more opportunities to do things like punk Christian music while keeping the service and when we gather together in a reverent position. So all in all, let's stay reverent, but let's continue to make art that challenges us and have that within the Christian ecosystem as well. And as we continue, let's be kind to people that are pushing the boundaries and are struggling with God, and the people who are the Jacobs in the church, because I love them as well. And although I've made up my emo punk band and my church crushes, I do think there are people that have those experiences and should be able to express themselves without us putting our nose up to them. So all in all, I hope you took something away from this video, and I maybe shifted your mindset a little bit about how we think about Christian music, especially within the church. And if you like this video, you should do all the things the algorithm tell you to do, like, subscribe, comment, and even go to my next punk rock concert. Thank you very much. This has been Balam David.